Before we can begin creating our template file for direct use within Vue, we first want to take a look in Photoshop in creating a template file for creating our leaves. Now, if you go into the Content folder for the tutorial and go under the Photoshop Reference folder, there is a file called Leaf Creation. I'm going to open that up. And now this is a file I've already started, and we have a couple of different groups. Our leaf shape group is currently blank. If we took a look over in the layers, and then we have two more groups. We have veins and leaf color. Now, this template file is a really good way to create basically any leaf shape from using the same file. And the more in-depth you get with the overall file, and the more work you put into it, you can end up with a file where you can end up creating any leaf you can think of just from the one file. And it's a much quicker way of going through and creating custom plants within Vue. And once we set up our templates within Vue itself and have the ability to load these in, you'll see how quickly you can create any plant you need very fast. Now, what I have loaded in right now, under the veins group, I have two different layers, and each one of these layers is a different set of veins we can use for a leaf. And each one of them is just set to multiply. We can take a look at the actual file itself, or layer itself. And basically what I've done is taking a leaf that I've scanned into the computer, and I've just cloned a lot of the veins outward in order to cover up as much of the square as possible. I'm also using, if we take a look, a 1024 by 1024 size for our document. And if you need to go a little bit higher to create more detailed leaves, you can do that. But usually this size is more than enough because our final textures will usually end up being around this size for our plants. And that's with all of our branches and all of our different leaves together. So typically 1024 by 1024 pixels will be more than enough to create just one leaf. And if we take a look at the other file, this is also set to just multiply, and it's just a black and white taken from another leaf. And most of these source images actually came from our leaves collection. And there's a lot of different patterns available from those leaves that I was able to just kind of copy over into our template file. Now these are set to multiply because underneath in our leaf color group, we have two different layers right now. Of course, you can create as many as you want with different variations. And what I have is one layer, it's called yellow-greenish, or green-yellowish. And if we open up our layer properties and the layer style for this, I just have a color overlay of yellow set to the overlay mode with a little bit of opacity. We can adjust the opacity to adjust how much yellow we want to add into that color, but it's basically just a painted green layer filled in, and then a layer style on top of it to adjust our color. And I also have just a green one, something a little bit darker, and that way you can choose from different colors that you want. You can blend those together because these are also set to the multiply mode. So if you need to create other leaf colors, you can just copy these, create different variations, different colors, and then once you have all of the different layers available, when you need to create a leaf, you can just select the color that you need. Because really the whole point of this file is to have something quick and easy. So if I wanted to create a red leaf, what I'm going to do is just take our green, go ahead and make a copy of it. I'm going to change our layer properties and call this red. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to select a red color. That's something a little bit darker. And just go ahead and paint that in. And since we have a layer style on here, we could either use the color overlay to change and adjust that overall look. So I could change to a different color red, And now we can adjust the opacity value to either brighten it up, make it a little darker. We could also change it to a different color if you wanted to blend a little bit more with some yellow. And then we can get more of an orange leaf. I'm going to change that back to a little more of a red. I'm going to make it darker, and then we can use that color to blend in and click OK. So now we can select any one of these different colors to use as a background color for our leaf. We could also blend these different colors together. I'll take the red, set that to multiply. We're going to end up with a very dark color that way. But you can use them together in different combinations. I could also choose our different vein, and even our veins will be able to blend together and create different styles and shapes. So it really depends on how many different types of shapes you want available within your template file. And if you spend a lot of time on it, really adding a variety of different vein shapes and colors, you can end up with a very, very useful file when you need to create custom leaves and entirely custom plants. And I'm going to set this to that yellowish green. And we're going to go up to Leaf Shape and just select our group, because now we need to create our shapes that we want to use for our leaves. And once we create these shapes, we'll be able to use them with any of the possible combinations of veins and colors. What you can also do is create other groups to create dyeing parts of the leaves, and you can turn those layers on and off and create different color combinations and variations throughout the leaf. But first, let's go ahead and just create a new shape for our leaf. I'm going to go down to our Shape tool and select Custom Shape. And you can choose through the library that comes with Photoshop, because some of these shapes are a really good starting point for leaves. There's also some leaves that are available within here that you can use. You'll want to customize them a little. But if we take a look, we can see there's some leaves in this section. And now, if these are not loaded in, I'm using Photoshop CS3, but some of the earlier versions will also have these shapes available. And what you can do is just select some of the different shapes loaded up. And once we select it, you can append, and that will load into your current library so they all show up. And a lot of these different shapes will work for a starting point for the leaf, and then you can just customize it, change some of the areas. We have this raindrop, and I'm going to go ahead and select the raindrop, and I'm going to change our color to white. And now if I hold down Shift and just pull this out, I'm using Shift to make sure that it is constrained, because I do like the way that shape is working. And now we can right mouse click on our layer and select Rasterize. If you use the Move tool, V on the keyboard or clicking on the top of the toolbar, we can go ahead and move that around. You can center it. But right now I'm not really worried about centering it. What I really want is a little bit of a better shape, because of course this isn't going to make the best leaf. And we really only need to worry about one side of the leaf. So I'm going to hit Control-T on the keyboard, which is going to bring up the Free Transform, and I'm going to select Warp. Now, if you're using a previous version of Photoshop that doesn't have the Warp tool, there are other ways you can modify your leaf. You can go up to Filter and select Liquify, which is also another good way to customize and adjust these different shapes. You can also draw out your own paths, and really any way you like to work around in Photoshop, you can use these methods just to create some custom leaves for your template file. So I'm just going to pull these areas out just a little, hit Enter, and now what I want is just one section here, because we just modified the right side. And I'm going to hit M on the keyboard to bring up our Marquee tool, which is just underneath Move in the toolbar. And we can just click and draw out the area of the part of the leaf we want. And I'm going to hit Control-C on the keyboard to copy, Control V to paste. And now we can hide our other layer, and hit V on the keyboard once again to move this. And with that Move tool still selected, we can hold down Alt on the keyboard and then click and drag over to create a copy. Now once that copy is created, we can hit Control T for free transform and just flip it horizontally. Right mouse click once it's free transformed. And if you go up to View and you have Snap turned on, you can just move that into place and it'll snap to our other layer. And now we have the two different layers with our different sides of our leaf. And if we hit Control E, it's going to merge those down into one layer. So now we have a shape that we can work with for our leaf. And of course you can customize this however you want to create a variety of different shapes. And really the whole idea is to create as many layers as possible, as many different shape combinations that you can come up with. And that way, when you need to have that shape available, you can go ahead and just choose the different layers and select which shape you need. I'm going to go ahead and delete that starter shape that we used. And now we need to take a look at kind of blending this together so we can get a good idea of what the leaf is going to look like. So first I'm going to set this to multiply, and now it's going to disappear completely because it is a white layer. But if we double click on our layer, we'll open up our layer style. And what I want to select is the inner shadow. And with inner shadow selected, I'm going to change our distance down to 0. And what that's going to do is make sure that we have a nice outline all the way through our layer, and we can increase the size of our shadow to give a nice blending on the edges. And you can also use this to create your bump maps, and that way you can create a curvature on your leaf. And then if you adjust the choke, you're able to darken that up, but really you'd want it a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring down our opacity, and we've got it at about 29%. We can adjust our size, and this is really just to give us an idea of the shape, because really what's going to be cutting out our overall leaf is by copying this shape into a black and white layer that we can use as a clip map. Now you could do other things with this as well. You could create gradient overlays. You can multiply that if you wanted a little darker at the base, and really play around with it however you want. Create another color overlay. To adjust the color, but really you want to use those layers we had created before within the leaf color group to maintain your color, unless you want to customize this a little bit more. What we can do is use an inner glow if we turn that on, and I'm going to use the default color right now, which is kind of a yellow, and I'm going to increase our size. And now if we adjust our opacity a little, what we end up with is kind of a yellow outline for our leaf. Now with the screen mode on, it looks a little white towards the edges. So we can go through and pick a style that is really going to show up our color. And with the linear dodge add turned on, we can use that and really see the yellow showing up a little bit better, increase our size. This way we have a nice color variation kind of showing up. And another thing to keep in mind is if we are going to be using these settings, you also want to apply that to the outside. And that's just to make sure that our clip that we're going to create doesn't have a harsh edge. So if we turned on our outer glow, we would want to match these settings to our inner glow, and drop shadow, we'd want to match our settings to our inner shadow. But right now we're not going to worry about that, because we just want to take a look at the leaf shape and what we can really do with it. Now another thing you could do is use colors on a different layer if you didn't want to have each shape layer with its own color, or you can create groups for each individual shape and have different variations of color within those layers. There's so much you can do with it, and it's really helpful the more time you spend. But we're going to take a look at one more option, and what I want to do is create a new group, and I'm going to call this middle shadow. I'm going to go to our shape tool and select the rectangle. I'm going to change this to black, and I'm just going to draw out a rectangle in the center, rasterize it, V on the keyboard for the move tool, and we can move that into place. I'm going to turn off snaps so that we're not snapping to the center, and I want to make sure that this is going to show up in the center of our veins. If we go up to Filter and select Blur, Gaussian Blur, I'm just going to go ahead and give that a little bit of blur. Click OK, and now we can adjust the opacity. In this way, we can darken the center of our leaf, and that will also be helpful if you're creating a bump map by using some of these different layers to create that curvature and the illusion of depth within the leaf. What you can also do is, first I'm going to name this small, create a copy, turn off our first layer, call this one medium, go back to our Gaussian blur and blur that a little bit more so it's a little larger. We can adjust the opacity on that, and this way you could have different amounts of center shadow depth depending on the size of the leaf you're working with. Now, this square design is going to directly link to the template we're creating in Vue. So everything within Vue is going to be square. Like all of our shapes to represent our leaves will end up being square. So that way, anything we create in this template file we'll be able to transfer over. So basically we have a color map done for one of our leaves, and if we want to turn off this shape, all we have to do is turn off the layer, and if you have other shapes available you can just turn those on, turn the other ones off, and then just pick the shape you want. But what we need to set up now is our clip map, and what is going to be cutting out the rest of this image so that we just have the shape we need. So I'm going to create a copy, but let's go ahead and change that from layer 3 to shape 1, and then we'll change our copy of that to shape 1 clip. And now we're going to turn off our shape 1. And at this point, you want to make sure that you do not move or modify your first layer that's determining your color. One thing you can do, select both of your layers and link them, and that way you make sure that you're not going to move one and not have the other one go with it. Because of course you want your color and clip to line up perfectly. So I'm going to turn this off multiply. I'm also going to turn off our group for the middle shadow. We're going to open up that copy, turn off inner shadow, and turn off the inner glow. We also need to create a new background. And I'm going to just copy our background, go to the layer properties, and call this alpha. And now just above our leaf color, or actually we could put this above our veins, just to make sure those aren't showing up as well. And it'll just make it a little easier so you don't have to keep turning off multiple groups. Just go into our veins, select new group, and I'm going to call this alpha, and then drag our alpha layer into that. So now we can turn this on and off without worrying about the rest of these layers interfering. We're going to go back to that shape and that clip, and I'm going to set up a color overlay. I'm going to change this to black, and this way we don't need to invert our clip map once we get into Vue. And I'm going to turn on stroke. Now the reason I want to turn on the stroke is because I'm going to use this to cut out a little more of the shape to make sure that we don't have any lines caused by our color map. And if you ever end up with a white background with some leaves, you just want to make sure that you're cutting it a little bit more than the color map. So I'm going to change our color to white. And depending on how much you modify your shape, sometimes you could have little pixels on the edges that you might not have noticed. So I'm going to change our position to the center. And so you can see this a little bit better, what I'm doing. I'm going to change this to blue, size it up a little bit, and you can see how it's just cutting inward and outward of our shape. Because if you modified it a little bit more, maybe have some pixelated edges, this will take care of that and smooth it out a little better. There's an outside, inside, which will just take care of the inside ones or the outside. But the center is the best way to go, and the way I like to do it, and that way we're cutting the outside of the leaf and the inside. Change that color to white, and click OK. So now we have basically our clip map that we can use along with our color. And if you want to see the color, all you have to do is just turn these layers on and off. But if this alpha background we created was underneath leaves or veins, then what would happen is those veins or colors would be showing up, and we don't want that. So basically this leaf is ready to be saved out. But first we are going to need to create our branch file. And the branches we're going to be connecting these leaves to. So I'm just going to save this out. And I've just called it Leaf Creation Custom, so you can open that up in order to get to the point where I'm at right now. And we're going to start working on our branch file. And our images we're going to need in order to create our branches for our template. And then we'll be able to start bringing them together and really working on the scenes that will create very quick and easy color and clip maps for our different custom trees.